Hello everyone, Alec Alger the SideQuest Gamer here, at least the mind of the SideQuest Gamer, and words cannot describe how flawed this game is. Never have I played a game so unfinished, except for Superman 64 and other games, but this was a AAA release back in 1996. Sure, there's a lot of garbage on the Steam greenlight, but this was a $50 game. That makes it automatically worse than anything you'll find on Steam. And after playing this, I have to ask, what the happened?
I know I should have taken that left turn at Uranus! Was it something I said? What could possibly go wrong?
Long have I dreaded this day, ever since I started this YouTube channel. The day I would play one of the worst 5th generation games of all time. For days and days I played this game, and oh man, it was horrendous. I was so appalled by the quality of this game, I didn't want to show my face on camera for weeks. The face of someone who played the one, the only, Bubsy 3D. Words cannot describe how bad this game is. Sure, it's semi-playable, but it's so unfinished. Words just can't describe it, so I'll describe Bubsy 3D in pages of script and dialogue instead. So basically, remember my Bubsy 2 review when I told you that the series creator Michael Berlin left Accolade to start his own development studio? Well, guess what? Along with co-founder Mark Bank, that studio became Eidetic, and after Bubsy 2, Berlin took that team and returned to the franchise, and they began work on Bubsy 3D. But wouldn't you know that Eidetic had no experience with 3D game design tools? And, well, the results speak for themselves. Although, to be fair, it was originally planned for the Sega 32X, but due to poor sales of that add-on, Accolade held off the release until they could put it on a more stable platform, which was later the PlayStation console. Berlin wanted this game to be accepted as an early 3D platformer, but unfortunately the game's development took longer than expected, and after looking at the high quality of Super Mario 64, he wanted more time to polish the game and finish it, but Accolade wanted the game to be released as soon as possible. Oh, Accolade, you sure dropped the bomb on Eidetic, only for its blast radius to take you down, while Eidetic rose from the ashes and made amazing games like Siphon Filter 1 and 2, while you went out of business. Remember, publishers, patience is a virtue, and a profitable one at that. So the end result, Accolade published Bubsy 3D and it was released for the PlayStation on October 31st, 1996 in North America, while Telstar published and released the game in Europe on August of 1997. Keep in mind, for the North American release, this was 1 month after Super Mario 64's release. For the Europeans who didn't get Super Mario 64 until March of 1997, that was 6 months later for them, leaving them even less impressed than the North American gamers when comparing Bubsy 3D's quality to Super Mario 64's quality. But enough about the development and publishing history. Let's talk about the game itself, and boy, do I have a lot to talk about. Anyways, from what you can gather from the gameplay footage, you can see that this game is so unfinished. Let's start with the most obvious. The graphics are terrible. Even the opening FMV looks like a slideshow, since the 3D models look like they're only talking and moving at only 10 frames per second. Not only that, the character models' movement animations are very stiff and awkward, like they're controlled by poorly made animatronics. Then when the game starts, you notice that the first level looks like mountains and floating platforms with a checkered pattern like the ultimate acid trip. I assure you that you're sober and that the game designers with Berlin leading them were just lazy. I don't know much about 3D modeling, but from what I hear, at least coloring the ground a solid green or gray, or at least not repeating the same checkered pattern over and over, is the easy part of 3D modeling. It's not like the AI design behavior and cause and effect program, but for that, they sure knew how to make the AI aggressive, that's for sure. But the graphics are very bad, even for 1996. Crash Bandicoot came out the same year, and while he's a bit pixelated, the graphics in that game are still kind of nice to look at, because a lot of heart went into that. And the worst part about Bubsy 3D's graphics is that the character and enemy models look like they don't belong in the levels, like they only exist as toys in a cardboard cutout battlefield that someone made in 1 second. The water and splash effects are not that good either when compared to games like Super Mario 64 or Crash Bandicoot. With a total of 15 levels in the game, it's like these levels were only designed in a few months when they should have at least taken years. The controls are by far the worst part of the game, although this was before analog controls, so I don't mind moving Bubsy with the directional pad, although you know how the 4 directional buttons move Crash and Mario up, down, left, or right in the desired direction without any problems? Well, in order to move Bubsy forward, you have to press up on the directional pad to move forward, and in order to turn left or right, you have to stop and make Bubsy turn around in the desired direction, and then press up to move in that direction. That is very uncomfortable and abusive to the thumb joint, say if you were one of those who played the game for hours. The other controls aren't that bad. Press X to jump, hold triangle to glide, R1 to run, although I wouldn't advise running due to the lack of left and right maneuverability. You can glide after pressing the jump button, but if you do a front flip while jumping, you can't glide, which may lead newcomers to their deaths. The controls leave so much to be desired. While they don't make the game unplayable by any means, it does feel like a tank. The controls are so bad, I think that if you put Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine from the first Resident Evil into this game, they would make better platform mascots than Bubsy would, and they can't even jump. At least with Resident Evil, the game was built around the tank-like controls to the point where I wouldn't have it any other way. But with Bubsy, the controls are just awkward, and they really need to change it up to make it more comfortable. The story of the game is not worth writing too home about either. Basically, General Wooly, the final boss from the first game, plans another invasion of Earth, so they kidnap Bubsy, who's a lot more annoying than the last 3 games' Bubsy voices combined in unison if you have to. But on the way back to their planet, Rayon, the ship malfunctions and the Bubsy escapes and wreaks havoc on the planet. I guess General Wooly is like the main antagonist of the Bubsy series. Man, is he pathetic. Why didn't they take Bubsy away from their own planet? I mean, I'm pretty sure they have the technology to send a UFO into deep space with Bubsy inside, cut off oxygen in that ship, evacuate, leaving Bubsy behind, and then blow up the ship from a distance. But no, I guess they have some Geneva Convention of Prisoner of War contract on their planet that states that they cannot kill Bubsy for some reason. Or at least they only are allowed to kill him in combat. The music is repetitive, annoying, and poorly written. The same 10 notes play in the background of each of the game's soundtracks, and it sounds very choppy, which I wouldn't mind say if this game was in a cartridge format, but this is CD-ROM technology we're talking about here, so there's absolutely no excuse for not having MP3 quality music on a not-so-new format built for MP3 quality. It would be like if the new Call of Duty had 8-bit music, is how dated the music direction is for this game. The sound mixing besides the music isn't that great either, with the voices and sound effects. In the opening FMV, you have to make an effort to hear what General Wooly is saying and what the convention members are saying. They tried to add synthesizers to make them sound otherworldly, like they're aliens, but it didn't work out too well in the end. And it's worse for the ending FMV. Oh, and Bubsy is no longer voiced by Rob Paulsen, and now Bubsy apparently had a sex change operation because Lanny Minnelli, who later did Rouge the Bat and Omochao in Sonic Adventure 2, provided the voice of Bubsy. And while she's an amazingly talented voice actress, she didn't do a good job making Bubsy sound like his gender. Like, you could tell it was a woman voicing him, making it confusing. And before you get all ultra-feminist on me saying I'm a misogynist pig who doesn't want female voice actresses, I don't have anything against female voice actresses who voice male characters as long as they sound like the character's gender. Like Debbie Derryberry, who voiced Jimmy Neutron, did a great job making Jimmy sound like a 10-year-old boy. Or Nancy Cartwright, who voices Bart Simpson in The Simpsons. She did a great job making Bart sound like the iconic 10-year-old boy he is, but Lanny didn't sound right for Bubsy, I'm sorry to say. And to get how alienated I feel when Lanny Minnelli voices Bubsy, it would be like, say, if Frank Welker voices Barbie.
Silence! It is imperative that that cargo remains secret. Dirge, shut down the rest of your systems and remain still.
You know who would have been a better voice actor for Bubsy in this game? Jess Harnell, who did Wacko Warner on Animaniacs, but that's just my opinion. Now what can I say about the level design? If you love the careless level design and cheap enemy placement of Bubsy 1, then you got it all right here, perfectly translated into 3D. Although the enemies are spaced out a bit more and the game's draw distance is short, so it's not like you can see a lot ahead of you. And I know that the PS1 had some limitations, but Crash Bandicoot had a longer draw distance than Bubsy 3D. The game's camera isn't that much help either, because while it's stable for the most part, it turns to Bubsy's front instead of behind when he gets hit by an enemy. Then when Bubsy jumps, the camera shifts downward to the floor, which I wouldn't mind if the jump and collision detection didn't suck. Because the enemies throw the smallest little projectiles at you where sometimes you won't see coming because the camera is focused so close to you instead of zoomed out. I mean, I wish there was a zoom out feature like in Super Mario 64 so I could judge the enemies and terrain around me, but that's life, I guess. Okay, how did Bubsy 3D get the PS Extreme Gold X award again? Oh, I forgot to mention that on the cover of Bubsy 3D, Accolade lied to us, saying that EGM and PS Extreme praised the game, although EGM is a real magazine that actually wrote a rather negative review on Bubsy 3D. Accolade only took parts they liked to make it seem like praise, so technically they're quoting the magazine's article, but at the same time false advertising the game, making it sound better than what they actually said it was. PS Extreme I don't even know ever existed. I have read the PlayStation magazine, but never the PS Extreme magazine. No matter who you ask, it either existed, but there was no such thing as a Gold X award, or the magazine and the award just never existed entirely. I bet the Better Business Bureau had a lot of paperwork to fill out the day they heard that Accolade was falsely advertising their game. But back to the level design, all they did was make a giant open space filled with enemies to jump on with a get to the end of the level objective, and stick a few great generic platforms in a generic 3D plane and call it a day, as well as make optional collectibles that are spread out through each level. You know, that is what they should have put on the front cover. Bubsy 3D, literally a platformer in 3D. At least that's a little more truthful. Now there are boss battles in this game, but there's only 3 and they all require to be bounced on multiple times in order to be defeated, so there's no real strategy. You fight that nerdy scientist Wooly on his floating platform, that mammoth thing, and then you fight General Wooly. They're so broken, but they're manageable. Now, is this game one of the worst games ever made, you may ask? The answer in all honesty is yes. While not the worst game, since it's semi-playable, it's just so broken and unfinished. However, I actually highly recommend this game to everyone. Yes, it's so bad, it's a perfect example of how not to make a game. In fact, this game should be assigned to 3D design classes in all universities to tell students that if they don't do well, then their Frankenstein's monster of a game will ruin somebody's childhood. I'm not kidding. In fact, everyone should play this game because you think Sonic 06 or E.T. is bad? Play this game. It's on par with Big Rigs, and while not as bad as Awesome Possum, it's still very bad. So overall, I would give Bubsy 3D a 2 out of 100. The only redeeming factor of this game is that it finally included a save system that the previous 3 games desperately needed, but that's pretty much expected with all PS1 games. Its reputation is not over-exaggerated by any means, and whose fault is it in the end? You know, I'm not trying to be a white knight here, but it's not entirely Michael Berlin's fault that this game was such a mess. No, I'm not even kidding. It's Berlin's fault for thinking his team could pull it off, and he did bite off a bit more than he can chew, but Accolade really did press for the release, and if you're a developer, you're entirely at the mercy of the publisher. They had control over you where you don't breathe unless they tell you so, but in interviews, he blamed this game's failure on Super Mario 64's success. Sure, Eidetic tried to make an early 3D game, but Jumping Flash came out a year before Bubsy 3D, and it looks better, plays better, it's a platformer with shooting elements, and it's in 3D, and it's still amazing to this day. Never blame the success of another games as the reason why your game failed. Sure, very good games got cast into the shadows of other better marketed games or games that are more with the times, but really, if your game isn't up to snuff with the popular releases, either you failed in marketing, failed to offer the modern playing experience, or your game failed as a game itself. Well, game over for Accolade, because they went out of business. Okay, while Bubsy 3D didn't send them out of business, it was one of the main contributing factors to their downward spiral as a video game publisher. Now, Michael Berlin, don't get me wrong, is not a bad game designer. I really didn't care for the Bubsy series, but the man contributed Siphon Filter, which was also made by Eidetic, and it was well received. And he also made Zork the Undiscovered Underground, which was released after the original Zork trilogy on the PC. He also contributed to a lot of well-received text-based adventures for the PC when he was working with Infocom in the 80s. Also, he's written a few science fiction novels, so I really don't know why he cares deeply about the Bubsy franchise so much when he has infinitely better games that he has worked on. Michael Berlin did eventually retire from game development and started a light jazz band called Hot Mustard that is not that famous. I've never heard of them, but at least Berlin did something he liked afterwards. Now, it's not easy to go from making masterfully crafted text-based games in the 80s, and then the industry tells you to make 2D platformers because they're popular, and then they tell you to make 3D platformers because they're in the norm. It's hard to go from one thing you knew very well how to make to something you haven't had much experience with. The rapidly changing game industry is very hard on developers. Look at Howard Scott Warsaw. After developing E.T., Indiana Jones, and Yard's Revenge for the Atari 2600, he quit and now is a licensed psychiatrist. I can easily forgive Berlin for making Bubsy 3D, because even though it's one of the worst games ever made, it's also one of the best examples of how not to make a game, and how the worst games you've played probably are masterpieces when compared to Bubsy 3D. I don't even really hate this game that much. I mean, yes, it totally sucks, and I strongly dislike it. And yes, technically it's a poorly programmed game, and there's really no fun to be had. But when I beat the first boss of the game, I felt so awesome for beating a poorly programmed boss that constantly put me in a disadvantage. It puts you in a new type of determination into you to conquer something that constantly is trying to kill you. I've heard a reviewer call this game the Plan 9 from Outer Space of video games, and I really couldn't agree more. Like Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's so bad it has to be experienced. It's such a masterpiece of awful, it has to be played. Bubsy always asks what could possibly go wrong. It's like Bubsy 3D was prophesized in the previous games to answer that exact question. That is what could possibly go wrong if none of your development team has any experience with 3D game development. This is what could possibly go wrong if your publisher pushes and pushes a game for a release. This is what could possibly go wrong if you're a developer that bites off more than you can chew. We all make mistakes. Berlin made Bubsy 3D. Joel Schumacher made Batman and Robin. Every great developer and director had at least one dud in their collection of masterpieces. Thank you so much for watching my rather long review on Bubsy 3D. But before we go, let's talk about the endings. Now, I don't like to spoil endings, but let's face it, you're not going to get far enough in the game to care. So if you fail to collect all of the optional atoms in each level, when Bubsy takes a rocket to escape Rayon, he gets stranded in the middle of space. Now that's a bad ending. Now let's talk about the ever so rewarding good ending. If you do get all the items in each level and escape into the rocket ship and out of the planet Rayon, the villains reveal that they sabotaged the ship so that it would send Bubsy back to Earth, but in a prehistoric time.
Hey, how did I end up in Triassic Park?
So either way, whether it be Bubsy back in time or stranded in space, both endings are terrible because either way, the Woolies invade Earth without Bubsy's interference. Several hours of my life wasted. At least we'll never see Bubsy again. You know what? This game. So anyways, thank you so much for tuning in to my May marathon month of manure. Playing all 4 Bubsy games was no easy task, but if you want me to rank each game, number 4, Bubsy 3D. Number 3, Bubsy and Fractured Furry Tales. Number 2, Bubsy and Claw's Encounters of the Furred Kind. And number 1 would be Bubsy 2. Thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for the Classic Sonic month this June, and remember to stay awesome.